This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Kenya launches the second phase of a Chinese-built railway amid questions about its viability, but the president strongly defends it.
Let us join together and build on our vision, develop our country, be united.
Former students speak of torture and sexual abuse at an Islamic school raided by Nigerian police. Also in the program, Girl, Woman, Other. We speak to author Bernardine Evaristo, one of the two winners of this year's Booker Prize. And in sports, the International Olympic Committee says it could move the venue of the marathon event at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics due to high temperatures. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The second phase of a Chinese-built railway has been launched in Kenya. The $1.5 billion standard gauge line links the capital Nairobi to the Rift Valley town of Naivasha. President Uhuru Kenyatta has strongly defended the project, while critics have questioned its viability. The BBC's Ferdinand Omondi was at the terminus on the slopes of the Rift Valley.
This is the site of Kenya's first inland container depot of the standard gauge railway. It's a $7 billion project to modernize Kenya's rail transport, which starts from Mombasa and supposed to go all the way to the border between Kenya and Uganda in a town called Malaba. But it stops here, President Uhuru Kenyatta launching the passenger train service ahead of launching the freight service. And this place is about 20 kilometers from the nearest town with hardly any supporting infrastructure. And many Kenyans have now defined this as the railway to nowhere. Why? Because the Chinese government so far is stalling on funding the rest of the project all the way to the Uganda border. But the President Uhuru Kenyatta today has strongly defended on the need to sustain this project.
Let us join together and build on our vision, develop our country, be united, and not be dissuaded by naysayers who have not better to do than to continue putting us in a mood of depression. I will not be depressed. Let me tell you, my Mahio, Suswa, is not nowhere. This is Kenya.
This railway project has not been without its fair share of controversy. It is fully funded by the Chinese government, which some critics have described as very expensive and unsustainable to the Kenyan taxpayer. The passenger transport has been very popular from Nairobi to Mombasa, but this second phase stops practically in the middle of nowhere, 20 kilometers from the nearest town, and so people are questioning how practical it is. The cargo transport is supposed to be at the core of its profit potential, but that too has been met by resistance from truck drivers who feel it's taking away business from them, and even the business owners supposed to be transporting have been opposing plans to force them, according to the state, to transport their cargo via the train services. That directive given recently by the Ministry of Transport has had to be withdrawn after several demonstrations were held in the city of Mombasa. But the president has reminded Kenyans that even the city of Nairobi started as a train station more than 100 years ago and is now booming, and is positive that model will be replicated here. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Suswa.
Well, let's bring in Kenyan economist Tony Watima in Nairobi. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on the program. What was the thinking behind this line? Because it cannot just have been going nowhere.
Thank you, Sophie, for having me. I think the thinking was that we were building a dry port. We are building an industrial park in Naivasha. And so we are looking at how do we make it accessible. So the train and the railway system was one of the main things that we're looking at. It's interesting that we find that there's a passenger services that is coming up, apart from that, which was not in the initial plan. But the economic viability is within the freight cargo, which is doing freight transport alone without the passenger travel. We need to have the fact that this is a single track railway. So doing passenger and cargo is quite overburdening for such a single track railway. So the idea is that we're looking at something that we call a zombie project, that government is trying to make it work as it consumes resources. So we have no kind of a viability, a feasibility study that we see what is government looking at in this project.
Wasn't that done before this project was launched?
There was no feasibility study in public domain about this project itself and the whole of the SGR project. The first feasibility study was the contractor who was looking for this contract itself, which has a conflict of interest. The other feasibility study was the World Bank one, which said this project itself has no economic viability. So we don't have a third.
Tony, let me come in here, because one of the other biggest concerns here is the debt payment. What are Kenya's options if the country cannot pay back the debt?
I think the option is clear, that the contracts that are in public domain says that we have to pay the debt from the revenues from the project itself, and apart from that, government and taxpayer, that means taxpayer will have to pay for the debt servicing project itself. But also that in the provision of that contract is that government assets might be taken over if Kenya was to default in this project. So I think the investors have safeguarded themselves from the risk of falling from a debt failure from the Kenyan side itself. But I think the risk all lies to the Kenyan government and the taxpayer.
I wonder what the impact will be regionally or after this, because essentially or initially it was meant to link Uganda, isn't it?
Yes. The problem is that we haven't had a commitment from Uganda, who was supposed to pick the project from the other end, because the whole SGR project was about interconnectivity. Uganda has not been committed to the project, and I think that was one of the main things that the financiers of the project pulled out on the last phase between Naivasha and Malaba. We're hoping that Uganda will take up the project, and if Uganda was to take up the project, the viability of the project makes sense in terms of freight cargo than passenger rail. So I think if Uganda were to come into the picture, that makes economic sense for Kenya to invest in this project.
All right. Tony Watima, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that important subject. Thank you. Well, let's now take a look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. 5 parents have been arrested in Uganda for hiding their children to avoid the measles, rubella and polio mass immunization. The rollout started today and aims to target 18 million children across the country for the next 4 days. Uganda's health minister in charge of primary health care warned parents who tried to stop their children being immunized that they could face punishment.
We have an Immunization Act, a law that states very clearly that it is an offense for any parent or guardian to fail to immunize his or her child. You can actually be immunized, you can actually be locked up, imprisoned for 6 months.
Well, we mentioned some parents have been arrested for refusing to cooperate. Here is Diajene in Kampala.
The parents were arrested from their different homes in the eastern Uganda district of Kamuli, where some of the children who were supposed to undergo immunization are believed to have been hiding. Government says when health officials went to a school nearby, they found that 100 students had gone missing. They went looking for them, and some of them were found in the homes of these people. This is not the first time that government is facing resistance from groups of people who do not believe that children should be vaccinated, and parents who do not understand why their children have to undergo repeated vaccination. The mass immunization comes at a time when Uganda has been experiencing recurrent outbreaks of measles and rubella across the country. According to a report by the World Health Organization, since 2018, Uganda has had outbreaks of measles in 65 districts and rubella in 25 districts. The immunization targets all children under 15 years, even those that have previously been vaccinated of measles, rubella and polio. Dia Jean, BBC News, Kampala.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sports, we meet the Egyptian women striving to make their style of American football the most popular sport in Africa. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Now, we reported on this program on Tuesday about a police raid on a private Islamic school in Nigeria that led to the discovery of almost 70 men and boys in shackles. They say they'd been beaten and sexually abused. Our correspondent, Mayeni Jones, has now gone to the northwestern state of Katsina and sent this report.
This is the part of the school where some of the men and boys who were brought here by their families to be reformed because of drug abuse or because they were committed any crimes would be brought. About 40 of them would be kept in one of these rooms in chains. They'd be forced to urinate and defecate where they slept in front of other people, and they said that they were regularly abused physically and sexually by some of the teachers here. As you can see, there's still soiled clothing and mattresses, flies everywhere, discarded food. One former student described this place as hell on earth.
And government did not know what is happening exactly here, and no one have access to this place. So this place is a hell. There are many experiences that we experience in this house. The experience of hunger, the experience of deprivation, the experience of inhumanity, the experience of bullying, the experience of molestation, the experience of, I don't know how to say it, but thank God now, God has revealed what has been hidden for a very long time, and God has given us another chance to live our lives freely, not like slave trades.
Some of the former students say they were often brought out here for Quranic lessons and that many of the neighbors saw them in chains.
We couldn't do anything. We couldn't report the director of the school to the authorities or police because he's an influential person who is very powerful, and it could have a negative effect on our families. If I'm arrested as a result, then nobody will be able to pay for my bail. We knew that eventually God will intervene.
President Buhari has requested the closure of all these schools in northern Nigeria. But with one being found in his hometown of Daura, it shows that the problem is much more complex than he expected. Mayeni Jones, BBC News, Daura.
Now, depending on how you look at it, edible insects are often portrayed as something of a sustainable superfood, an environmentally friendly alternative to livestock. Unlike the production of meat, bugs don't use up large amounts of land, water, or feed, and insect farming also produces far fewer greenhouse gases. But who is already eating them, and do they actually taste any good? The BBC's Joyce Etutu has been to Kinshasa to find out.
Caterpillars and insects are a popular delicacy in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The market for edible insects is forecast to reach $1.2 billion by 2023.
This is Zigana Market, one of the biggest and busiest marketplaces in Kinshasa. Shoppers here can buy anything from clothes to household items and even insects. Let's go get some.
Farming a kilo of insects produces 10 to 100 times less CO2 than the same amount of meat. According to Fenor, a regular buyer, the insects are small but costly.
You see this? They are fresh and they've got loads of vitamins which people love. It's also traditional food from our country, so we eat it because we love it.
In Kinshasa, many places cook them. So just how do these creepy crawlies go from being in the market to a restaurant menu? I went to meet Madame Françoise, the owner of Les Bambous chez Françoise.
Hi, I'm Joyce.
Bonjour, c'est Madame Françoise.
She let me into her kitchen secrets.
So, shall we do some cooking?
Ouais, je prépare comme ça.
Bon, donc juste.
Voilà.
During this period, I cook all the insects which come out without a problem. So the caterpillars, the tree works, the crickets, all the insects at this period, I cook them.
Madame Françoise sells a small portion of caterpillars for 7,500 francs. That's just over $4, giving her a healthy profit margin. Despite this, she says the cost of insects have increased recently.
For the caterpillars, we buy them by cup. They are about 12,000 francs. Before there were 6,000, but now they've increased.
According to Madame Françoise, the business of bugs could be a good opportunity for the DRC.
They could create a society for it so that we can distribute them to other countries and explain that they feed children and adults who have health problems. That wouldn't be a bad idea.
30% of the world population feast away on edible insects. With their low production costs and high nutritional value, they're a great way to make an income here in DRC, and the market is set to grow. Now, I'm off to eat some more.
Very good. It's actually quite nice.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world. But Peter, I have absolutely no words for that, actually.
Many thanks, Sophie. Well, the marathon event at next summer's Olympics could be moved from the host city Tokyo to Sapporo, the capital of the northern prefecture of Hokkaido. The International Olympic Committee made the announcement today, saying this will mean significantly lower temperatures for the athletes during the Games. The Sapporo temperatures during the Games period are as much as 5 to 6 degrees centigrade cooler during the day than Tokyo, which is more than 800 kilometers further south. Sapporo hosted the 1972 Olympics. Rugby now, and South Africa say they will not let the ghost of 2015 haunt them as they prepare for their World Cup rematch with Japan. The Brave Blossoms, as Japan caused the biggest upset in the World Cup 4 years ago with their Miracle of Brighton win over the Springboks. The Springboks gained a measure of revenge, beating Japan 41-7 in a warm-up match in Kumagaya in September. But wing Cheslin Kolb says they will not be thinking about either game ahead of Sunday's clash.
Knowing that we had the loss against Japan in 2015, I wouldn't say it would always be stuck in your head, but we know that it's happened. But it's 4 years later. It's a new opportunity for us, and we just have to keep building week by week against teams that we keep on playing. And currently we're playing Japan in the quarterfinal now again. So we'll make sure that we really well prepared and just implement what the coaches want from us throughout the week, and not have that what happened in 2015 at the back of our heads.
Let's talk some football now. Well, actually, flag football. It's a variation of American football, and these ladies in Egypt are hoping to take it to the next level. BBC Sports' Janine Anthony went to meet them.
Welcome to the world of flag football.
1, 2, 3.
Yes! This is flag football. I'm sure you're wondering what sort of sport this is. It's a non-contact version of American football. So instead of the usual tackle, all the player needs to do is pull on this flag.
We wear 2 flags on our waist, and if you pull the flag, it's equivalent to a tackle.
Here are a few intricacies for the sport. Tackle football is known for its helmets and heavy padding, but in flag, there's none of that. In this version of the game, it's minimal contact. These ladies are part of a sport that is growing in popularity here in Egypt.
American football came to Egypt in 2007. We started with 3 teams at first, and then we started increasing the number of teams. In 2017, we reached 8 teams. So currently we have 16 teams, between 8 for men and 8 for women.
I used to play rugby before. I'm playing American football now, which is an extremely amazing sport. I'm really interested in playing team sports.
As the game grows, some of the women, who are mostly students, have faced their biggest challenges trying to convince their families to allow them to play.
Well, in the beginning, parents usually don't understand the game well, so they hear American football, they get shocked, and of course they worry about us because of the injuries and stuff like that. But once they begin to understand the rules, and once they come and watch the matches, they really enjoy it.
If we develop more coaches and if we have the right number of officials, we can go ahead maybe in around 3 years to have the first tackle football league for women in Africa.
For players like Malak, who won the award for the most valuable offensive player in the league, she welcomes the idea of being paid, but it will never be the sole reason she plays. Janine Anthony, BBC Sport Africa.
That's your sport. And back to your story about insects. I ate a grasshopper in Kampala 2 years ago. It's called Nsenene there. It took me 6 months to get the taste out of my mouth.
Oh, you did. I remember that. Oh, Peter. Now, let's move on now. This year's Booker Prize for Fiction has been divided between two writers, the British-Nigerian author Bernardine Evaristo and Canadian Margaret Atwood. The judges decided to disregard a rule that's been in place since 1992, which decreed there could only be a single winner each year. Well, the BBC's Victoria Uwanhunda spoke to Bernardine Evaristo and asked her how she feels about being the first black woman to have won the Booker Prize.
I think it's to do with the kind of value placed on literature by black women, and that we're just perhaps not seen to be writing great literature. And then we have to look at how you define great literature, and who defines great literature, and who the judges are who have decided what the great novels are. Each year, you know, books come up for the prize. So I think there are a mixture of factors at play. The fact that I've won the Booker doesn't mean that things have changed.
In your opinion, as an author who's been on the scene for a while now, what does need to be done to make sure that we have more black British women in the literary world seen and talked about?
Well, you know, we need to look at who the publishers are and who gets to become publishers in the publishing industry. And, you know, it's a very white industry. So, you know, the people deciding on what books are published are often not from black communities or black women's communities. So that's one of the ways in which it can change.
Your book, Girl, Woman, Other, talks about or centers about the otherness. Why did you choose to focus on that?
It's about womanhood. It's about the transition from womanhood to adulthood, and it's about the ways in which we are othered as women of colour in certain societies, in the UK, for example, but also we're othered. The women in the book are othered in terms of their sexuality, because there are characters on the queer spectrum in the book, several of them, on account of their class, on account of whether or not they're immigrants or not, and they even other each other. So they're a very sort of diverse group of women. There's no sort of homogeneity among them at all. So that's one of the points of the book, really. It's to say we are as varied and multiple in who we are and how we behave and our desires and our lives as any other sort of social group or demographic anywhere.
What is your take on the current crops of African authors?
Fantastic, you know, but let's not forget it was the Cain Prize for African Fiction that changed the situation for African poets, because the Cain Prize brought to prominence a generation of African writers, and now there are too many to mention.
You took your father back to Nigeria for the first time back in 1992. How was that first meeting with the country and the birth country of your father?
It was really exciting. And having grown up with a Nigerian father but never been, a lot of questions were answered for me about the place that he came from. I went to the house where he grew up and so on. And I didn't know if I could live there, but I felt a connection to the place because this was where my father came from. It was eye-opening, it was groundbreaking, and kind of nourishing. It was nourishing to be there, yes.
Bernardine Evaristo there. Now, before we go, take a look at this. A painting by the artist considered to be the father of Nigerian modernism has been bought for $1.4 million at an auction in London after the owners Googled the artist's signature. Ben Enwionwu's Christine, painted in 1971 in Lagos, had been in the home of the family of the sitter since then, according to the auction house Sotheby's. Don't forget you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm Atsi Kenny. Thanks for your company.